Is a hot dog a kind of sandwich? Sure, it's meat between bread, right? Yeah, but the shape is all wrong. Sandwiches aren't shaped like that. What about subs, though? They're that shape. Those are different. They're clearly the same. Ergo, hot dogs are totally sandwiches. Hot dogs are not sandwiches. This seems like a ridiculous thing to argue about. We should be able to tell what is and isn't a sandwich. Let's start by asking ourselves, what actually is a sandwich? Google defines a sandwich as an item of food consisting of two pieces of bread with meat, cheese, or other filling between them, eaten as a light meal. But there's a trick here. For any object in the world, there are two concepts corresponding with it. First, there's the physical world. Atoms and stuff. Electrons, fields, gravity, bread, mass, napkins, the stuff that exists out there in the object space beyond our minds. Then there's the conceptual world of ThinkSpace. ThinkSpace is where all our ideas live. Little ones like a sandwich is meat between bread, but also big ones like justice, memes, language, international communism, science, and religion. Object space and our internal models of thing space do interact with each other through us, but things in thing space aren't objects in object space. A sandwich is the label for a class of objects in object space, but the concept of a sandwich exists in thing space. Object space is the real world, but sandwiches don't exist in object space. The objects we attach the sandwich label to exist in object space, but those objects are super weird. For instance, the thing space idea of a sandwich is made of bread and meat or cheese, but bread is another thing in thing space. It's made of flour and water and yeast and sugars. But those things are also things in thing space, and you can keep going until you get to, the quantum mechanics thing, where, as best we can tell, it actually bottoms out in object-level weirdness. Thing space has n-dimensionality. That is, you can define it by the number of axes you need to express all the traits of a given concept. Simpler ideas might only need a few axes, while complex ideas could have dozens or even hundreds of axes in an unimaginably complicated hyperchart. Let's look at that sandwich chart again. This is a total meme image, but it's actually useful. Somewhere in your model of thing space is a model of what a sandwich is, and it's different for different people. As the distance in thing space increases between an object you're trying to identify and your model of that object, the connections grow more and more tenuous and harder to justify. Is a hot dog a sandwich? Sandwiches tend to share a lot of traits in common. They're a food thing, filling enclosed in bread on either side, often containing condiments. If you were to chart all the traits for sandwichness and how they all related to each other, it might look something like this. In theory, you could imagine this sort of algorithm telling you everything you needed to know. If an object is edible, it's likely to fit in your hands. If it's filled with meat and cheese, it's likely to be savory tasting. We could assign probabilities to all those various relationships and say things like, if two pieces of bread have something between them, there's a 67% chance of that filling being meat. But despite that, it still feels like there's an unanswered question. Is it really a sandwich? Why do we feel that way? Where does that feeling come from? It comes about because this model has some problems. For one thing, if you inscribe it in blood, you might accidentally summon the devil. But for another, it's computationally expensive. Every attribute affects every other attribute, which affects it in turn, and so on in an infinite loop. There's no place where the equation collapses into a simple yes-no answer. It just tells you that things are varying degrees of sandwichy. That feeling of there being a last, unanswered question comes from this. This algorithm seems to more closely resemble how people actually think. That is, instead of relating everything to everything else, we just define all the relationships with respect to a central node whose decision can vary even after we look at all the facts. This is quick, dirty, and useful. It lets us sweep a lot of minor confusion under the rug. A hoagie isn't quite two pieces of bread, but it's got all the traditional sandwich toppings between bread, so we know which way it seems to be leaning. But when something has about half the traits of a sandwich and half not, it gets awkward. Hot dogs are sandwich-sized, savory-tasting, tube-shaped. The fillings are sandwich-ish. the taste is sandwich-ish? We can know everything about a hot dog, figure out how closely it sits to a model sandwich in ThinkSpace, but even after knowing all that, it still feels like there's a question left to answer. Is a hot dog really a sandwich? So what do? The idealistic answer is to say, wait a minute, we're not defining sandwich the same way, so the boundaries we draw around the sandwich concept look different and don't fully overlap. We should probably take that into account. The practical answer, at least with regards to big important things, is to get all the top people relevant to the issue in one place and come up with a ruling that gets everyone on the same page. But the most common answer seems to be declaring that as a structure-neutral ingredient purist, you hold the one true definition of sandwich and all others are heretics that must be purged from society. This is, of course, not helpful. Claiming to have the one true meaning of sandwich is like claiming to have the one true meaning of fish. There isn't one true meaning. It's just a semantic argument. The meanings of words shift over time, and the concepts they convey can vary from person to person. The fact that we love to put things into categories and boxes means these sort of issues will keep coming up. Not everything fits into neat boxes. The traits we associate with a given concept don't always go together. There are edge cases. And where there are edge cases, we just have to decide by fiat. However, we should try to remember that in cases like this, we're deciding. We're not discovering or determining. There's no objective truth to find. There's just different people's perspectives and opinions. Is a hot dog a kind of sandwich? That depends on your point of view.